tuning in to the online broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans, producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows, interviewing celebrities and showrunners, and bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Yeah, get it! Always love starting with some Clapton, mainly because that was the first song that popped into my mind that had Sheriff in the title. But you know what? It works. It's a jam, and we're here. It's the second episode of the official Second Chance AfterBuzz. I'm Ty Matthews, your host. Joining me, as always, my very lovely, talented co-host.
Hey, I'm Jamie Banks, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at JamieBanks_.
You sure can. What'd you think of tonight's episode, Jamie?
I thought it was good. There was a lot of great action scenes and a lot of funny moments, too. I think overall it was really great.
Absolutely. We're really getting into the meat of what makes Second Chance. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind you guys, if you're loving what we're doing, just like we love what you're doing out there on the internet, we implore you, we request, we would even love for you to go on to iTunes, to rate, download, subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating, all that stuff. It genuinely really, really helps a lot. But more than anything, we just want to hear what you think. If you love Second Chance the way we do, we just want to hear what your thoughts are, and that'll give us some material to, just, shoot the S, kind of chit-chat about this brand new Fox show.
Yeah, definitely tweet us. I love to hear what you think, and I'm sure you have some opinions we haven't thought of.
Now, to recap, basically, last week was the series premiere. We got a whole lot of exposition. The basic gist of it, let me see if I can condense this into a TLDR version. Basically, we got Jimmy Pritchard. He's a 75-year-old disgraced former sheriff. He gets killed, brought back to life by a set of twins that run a $10 billion social media conglomerate. One of them is dying of cancer. They use Jimmy's blood to try and cure that cancer. Meanwhile, Jimmy, in his newer, younger, faster body, tries to rekindle his relationship with his son, who doesn't know he's his son.
I think you summed it up pretty well.
That's pretty much that's kind of the basic, the meat and potatoes of it. So we start out episode 2. Jimmy wakes up. We see the return of Philip Baker Hall, which is always welcome. We see old Jimmy talking to new Jimmy in a dream sequence. He kind of explains the sitch to him, explain that he's 1 in 10 million, that he's got this rare genetic variation that's basically made him a prime candidate for resurrection, as it were. Meanwhile, we see that there are 2 escaped convicts. They've broken out. There's a big storm going. They've broken out. We find out at the FBI headquarters, or at the Seattle PD rather, that these 2 are doing life for attempted murder, and they've rechristened themselves Reborn in Blood. Now this is we got some heavy stuff right off the bat. I thought that it was going to be a little bit more kind of a long-term story looking at Jimmy and Duval, but it looks like there's going to be sort of a serialized element where there's kind of new crimes every week. What do we think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Right away, I was creeped out by them. I thought that they were like really scary people, and that was a new twist, that they were just these violent criminals that he's going to have to capture. So
sure.
That was a good twist.
Absolutely. But if anyone's going to catch him, it's going to be the GD sheriff, guys. Meanwhile, we've got Otto and Mary. They're looking at the numbers, and they find out that Mary's doing no better after her treatments, that soon her cancer is going to spread to her lymph nodes, and if nothing happens, if nothing improves, she's going to be gone by the end of the year. But there's something that Otto didn't count on, and it's that their donor, our Jimmy Pritchard, is growing even stronger. We see him lifting crazy weight. I mean, just benching like it's nothing. Just plates all day.
Yep, Mary loves it too.
Exactly. Oh, Mary loves it. We'll get to that. This means plates all day, guys. Plates all day. Let's get it trending. But we find out that he is 6 times an elite athlete, basically. He's basically, and I'm dating myself here, he's basically the $6 million man. He's a $6 million man. Do you know the $6 million man?
No.
$6 million man.
Sorry.
Oh, you are
I'm
killing
dating myself
me,
too.
Jamie. $6 million man. Long story short, show from the 70s about a guy named Steve Austin, not Stone Cold Steve Austin, but a guy named Steve Austin got brought back. He was made like a bionic man. He was the whole tagline was better, stronger, faster, or something like that. And I feel like there's a lot of the $6 million man in Second Chance. A lot of Frankenstein, a lot of $6 million man. As you said before we went live, a lot of kind of superhero elements.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't think he was going to be like a superhero, but it seems like he has these superpowers. He's rescuing people. He's catching the bad guys. He's definitely a superhero.
Sure. And I think, and it's interesting that you said that. I think his methods kind of make him an anti-hero, so to speak. You know, he loves being the sheriff, and we find out through the first episode and through this episode that the sheriff basically means, you know, kind of playing fast and loose with the rules, doing whatever it takes to catch the bad guys. You know, he's a vigilante in that sense. So there's a little bit of Batman, maybe.
Definitely.
So we find out he's 6 times an elite athlete, just crazy strong, crazy fast. Otto is convinced that his blood is the cure. That's what's going to save Mary.
And that whole scene was interesting because he said it so matter-of-fact, like not even like, oh, she's gonna get saved. He was just like, yes, and that will save her.
Exactly. And it's so interesting. It really speaks to Adair Kalyan's performance that I think Otto is that kind of person where even if it's the one thing that he cares most about in the world, he cares more about his sister than anything else on the planet. He still kind of has to treat it in that almost sort of clinical way.
Yeah.
And so it's a very sort of nuanced performance that I'm really getting into. We find out that the 2 escaped convicts from before are Leo Stacks and Edward Hume. And you know, we find out a little bit more about them and about kind of what they did, how they escaped during a riot, things like that. Then we cut to Jimmy and Mary, and Jimmy, now that he knows how valuable his blood is, he starts negotiating a little. You know, he calls Arthur Alfred, which I thought was may or may not have been an intentional nod to Batman.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
But Arthur politely corrects him. But you know, Otto and Mary want to keep him confined to that house because they don't know what could happen. But he wants to go out and he wants to catch these killers. He wants to keep being the sheriff.
Yeah.
You know, his body is this brand new tool that's at his disposal. And so he wants to use that. He wants to keep being the sheriff. And so he uses his own blood as almost like a leveraging chip.
I think it's awesome, though, because he really does want to help people. Besides, he has all these flaws, but you can tell he really wants to save everyone and he really wants to lock up all the bad guys.
Right. So we find out that basically when Mary and Otto brought him back to life, that sort of power surge caused a huge power outage, which in turn caused a huge riot at Pine Creek State Penitentiary, which led to not just these 2 killers, but a third breaking out of prison. The cops catch the third, and Jimmy knows that. He knows that he's in the hospital, so he kind of convinces Mary to let him use Looking Glass, let him, you know, use this giant, all-powerful, I said it last week, it's basically Skynet. It can see everything. It's Big Brother, it's Skynet, it's whatever you want to call it. It's omnipotent. And so I think we talked about it a little before we went live. It make things a little bit convenient in this universe, but we'll get to those. He goes to the hospital. He convinces the guard, with the help of Looking Glass, that he's from the Prisoners' Rights Commission. He's a guy named Stephen Decker, and you know, and it's funny. I love these little one-liners, and I'm convinced that the sheriff exists largely so that Jimmy can, you know, spout out these one-liners. And he tells the guard, who happened to work under him in a past life, he tells him, you know, I'm just here to make sure the prisoner gets what he deserves. And it's those lines. They're ridiculous, but they're why I love the show so far.
Yeah, it was also interesting because he was asking the the guy at the hospital what he thought of Jimmy Pritchard.
Right.
And it was kind of like, oh, so what did you think of me? And it's weird because it seems like he really cares about people's opinions of him, and he wants to see how they thought of him.
Right. And I'm wondering if that's going to start to sort of give him away. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we're only 2 episodes in, but we saw last week when he was talking to Bettina at the party when he first, got this new body. We see it now with the guard at the hospital. He really, really, he keeps kind of pushing, that Jimmy Pritchard guy, he's pretty cool, right?
It's weird because in normal life, you would never be like, oh, so you know this random person.
Right.
Let's talk about them.
Right, exactly. And there are a lot of notes that kind of are hit on the nose as far as oh yeah, he worked under Jimmy.
Yeah.
I feel like people are gonna get wise to that before too long. So Jimmy finds this third guy all strung up in the hospital and administers his own form of justice. He tells him, look, I don't even know how strong I am, so I'm damn sure you don't want to know.
Which was also weird because it's oh, I'm a superhuman, kind of. I wonder what the criminal thought at that moment.
Right. What would, I hadn't even thought about that, but what would he tell the next person that came in?
Yeah.
Pretty sure one of the X-Men just came in and tortured me and give up information. But I thought that was fun. Maybe he buys a little bit of silence with some more added pressure.
Yeah. Also, that scene was interesting because it made me think, when Jimmy was a sheriff, do you think he used illegal force? Because it seems like he's willing to do whatever it takes.
Well, and that was one of the interesting questions that I had thought about last week, is because we know that he had to resign. We know that he's charged with these things like witness intimidation and evidence tampering and things like that. What I'm wondering is, did those things actually happen? Did maybe he get framed? Did they happen but they're justified? Things like that. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think it was justified? Do you think it's on the up and up?
I kind of think he might have known somebody was a criminal and for sure knew that they murdered someone but had no way to prove it.
Sure.
And so he just planted evidence.
Right.
I'm sure he didn't set up anyone innocent. So
Sure.
I think it was something like he was 100% sure and really just wanted to get them behind bars.
Of course, yeah. The means, the ends justify the means. He's operating outside the law, as it were.
Yeah.
But in the world of Gotham City and the world of Batman, that's the problem that people have with Batman, is that police work should be left to the police.
True.
So there's this sort of theme of is vigilantism, right if it leads to the right person being caught, things like that. So they're interesting. We got a lot of interesting food for thought. We find out that this third guy that's strung up in the hospital, he wasn't planning on escaping, but when an opportunity presents itself, you're not just going to sit there and look at the open door.
I thought that was also interesting because I'm watching Prison Break right now on Netflix.
Okay.
So I was like, this is very similar but totally different because these are all bad guys
Sure.
that you don't like.
Sure. And what was interesting is that he says, it was like God was telling me to go. And he says, you can't shoot a man for listening to God. And it's so interesting, the presence of God in this show. And we got a lot of it last week. We got a lot of it this week. People either using God to justify their own means or, acting in spite of God the way that Otto and Mary might have. Very, very interesting
Combined
things.
with science, like all
Exactly.
these scientific themes.
Sure, definitely. And it's exactly with, we talked about the show originally being called Frankenstein. And so it's interesting seeing the prevalence of science and the prevalence of God, at least in name, in the show so far. So he finds out through his interrogation tactics that Stax and Hume are heading to a guy by the name of Luther Vernick, who's a big guns runner. He's been arrested multiple times for illegal firearms, things like that. And Jimmy plans on tracking him down. Obviously, things aren't quite that easy because right as soon as the elevators are about to close, Duvall walks up. And Duvall finds him. And Duvall, the last time he saw him was on that bridge when he demanded to know what the relationship was.
Right.
And Jimmy just conveniently kind of booked it.
Yeah.
And so now Duvall gives chase. He's chasing him through this hospital. Meanwhile, Jimmy, there's a really, really awesome scene that I think we both enjoyed where Jimmy's in the elevator and he's talking to a guy that, a doctor just told him that he was eating too much red meat for 70 years. And he says, that's exactly what he told me.
Yeah.
And I love those moments because, we see a lot of superhero in the show. We see a lot of different kinds of elements, but we see elements of body swapping movies, like Freaky Friday and The Change Up and things like that. So that provides for a little bit more levity.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of Jimmy's sense of humor, the use of...
I think it's really funny and entertaining, especially when there are scenes that are filled with action and more serious. It's just like a lighthearted joke here and there that really makes me laugh. And
Exactly,
I think it's really well done.
We got to break things up, for sure. We find Mary with Alexa, and Alexa is just a ball of nerves every show, because she, as far as she knows, Mary isn't getting any sort of treatment for her cancers. So Alexa just thinks she's allowing herself to die. But that's just a little sort of kind of...
Yeah, it's interesting. You would think that Alexa would sort of catch on something is happening here. Or maybe Mary would be like, I have a plan, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Or something like that.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe that speaks to how guarded Mary is usually.
Yeah.
Maybe Alexa's used to not getting the whole story. So
maybe
all she knows is that Mary is sick. And that's only because she has to schedule her calls with her oncologist, who she hasn't been talking to. So... we find out, and this is all happening before the first commercial break, guys. There's a lot to unpack in this show. Jimmy finds Luther, but he finds Luther's place as soon as the cops do. And the cops seem to think that Jimmy is Luther. Now, I talked a little bit about Looking Glass being this sort of deus ex machina before the show. Otto, Mary kind of puts Otto on the case to sort of save Jimmy. Otto hacks the tasers of the cops to electrocute them and give Jimmy the chance to escape, where he probably gets hit by a car.
That was kind of cool.
And him getting hit by the car or the taser thing?
The first part. The tasering. That was cool.
That was cool. Yeah. I mean, what do we think? Do we think things are being made a little bit too convenient by Looking Glass?
I think the tasering was okay. I think later in the episode, like the tablet, we'll get into that later. I think that was a little bit unbelievable for me. So some of it I'm buying, and some of it I'm like, I don't know. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, on the other hand, it does make me fascinated to see just how far Looking Glass reaches.
Right.
Like in the world of the show, what do the American public think about Looking Glass, you know?
But I mean, it could happen in the future. Like,
absolutely,
a huge company could have that much power and that many resources. So I guess it's not too crazy to think about if you think about it in the future.
Exactly, and it's not. And what makes me think about that aspect of it is that people are already worried that Facebook has too much, access to our.
And maybe like the CIA, who knows? They could be doing something like that.
Right.
We don't really know.
And so it makes me think, if Looking Glass existed, there would be protests every day on every street corner, you know? But maybe, they're very cleverly hiding just how much power it has.
Maybe, yeah.
Do we think it's all just to find a cure for Mary's cancer?
I don't know. I think maybe they had other reasons too, like for the good of the people.
Sure.
Maybe they see having that much power, they can conveniently help people too. I don't know if
almost
that's
like a little.
motive.
Have you seen Person of Interest?
Yes.
Yeah, that's just like Person
sort
of
of
Interest.
like that. Yeah, maybe. I don't think it was just to help Mary.
Right. Okay. So we're finally at the first act break. Now, what's interesting is that when we come back to Otto and Mary, he mentions that Jimmy is ours. He kind of claims this sort of ownership. And it almost seems like, going back to God, does Otto sort of have this God complex over Jimmy?
I think he looks at Jimmy as his creation. Like he's the scientist and Jimmy is just this body that they created and not a human.
Sure.
And so I think he has ownership in that way. And he looks at Jimmy as the person who's going to save, or the thing that's going to save Mary. And that's all he looks at him as.
Right. And that's, with the parallels to Frankenstein, obviously Frankenstein's monster ended up turning on Victor Frankenstein. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
It's been out for a few years.
It's a little bit. So, obviously the monster turned on his creator. Are we going to see a confrontation between Otto and Jimmy?
I could definitely see that coming.
All right,
I think there's already tension there.
Sure.
So I could see Jimmy in the future wanting to do something like wanting to go out and save people, and Otto says, no, stay in the house, and then they get in a fight. Or something like that.
Right. We could see that. I feel like if they do fight, if they do come to blows, it's going to be over Mary. Otto feels so threatened by Jimmy, both physically and in terms of, if there does develop this sort of, bond between Mary and Jimmy, as there obviously will.
Yeah.
Otto, he doesn't want to lose his sister.
Right.
He doesn't want to lose her to cancer, but he definitely...
very, very overprotective.
Exactly, yeah. To the point of bringing someone back from the dead to save his sister.
True.
So it's interesting. I wrote here, it's seeing Otto's God complex is an interesting kind of flip side to what seems like Mary's martyr complex. She feels like because them bringing Jimmy back allowed these killers to escape and to kill more people, that they're responsible for that and they need to catch these killers, or they at least need to help Jimmy catch these killers.
I think she says it's not just us anymore, and I feel like what she meant by that was there are other people that have been killed, there are other people involved in this, and we need him to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. So we find that Stax and Hume killed Luther and took all of his guns. So now not only are these two killers on the loose, not only is Reborn in Blood on the loose, but now they are armed to the teeth. So they are bringing a huge, huge threat to the people in the city, to the people of Seattle. Meanwhile, we've got Duvall running the plates on the Goodwin twins' father's car, which is now Jimmy's car, finding that it's registered to Looking Glass. So that kind of gives Duvall and Mary a reason to interact finally. We knew that they would, but I don't think I thought that they would this soon.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I realized that he looked into the license plate, so that seemed like a logical next step.
Right.
But I think he knows Mary's involved somehow, but has no idea how.
Right. Do we think that Mary and Otto either would have or should have changed the license plate, or...
That would have been a little bit smarter.
Right, yeah. Just like having this guy that's been brought back to life, driving around a car that's registered to the company... I'm not sure if that was the sharpest move.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But what's interesting is that when he goes and meets with Mary, he wants all of this information about whoever was driving that car, about that car, and he wants it without a warrant. Do we think that in Jimmy's absence, Duvall is sort of becoming his father?
I don't think so.
No?
Just because I think he would never go to the lengths that his father went to.
Not yet, anyway.
He's so against it, and I feel like when he was a child, or maybe a teenager, he always saw what his father was doing and seemed so against it that I don't think he would ever just completely flip like that.
Right.
But I guess if it was to figure out the truth with Jimmy because he knows there's something going on, maybe he would. That is an interesting question.
Right. When it's kind of his family at stake and facts about his family on the line.
Yeah.
I think he's maybe willing to play a little bit loose, maybe not as loose as Jimmy would, but maybe demand information without a warrant. But Mary, I mean, she was right on top of it, saying, you know what? I don't have to tell you this.
Well, at first he was just asking.
Right.
So I feel like he didn't do anything wrong.
So then after that, Jimmy, he's talking to Mary, and he says that if Duvall ends up going to jail because of what happened on that bridge, he's going to expose everything. So they have sort of a stake in protecting him and making sure that he doesn't get caught or get busted or get sent to jail.
Right. Because they need him to save Mary.
Right, exactly. Meanwhile, the Seattle PD is looking for Jimmy. They have no clue who he is. They don't know where Duvall is. It turns out Duvall has gone to his sister, to Helen, tells her, look, I've done something I shouldn't have. You need to take care of Gracie. Jimmy arrives on the scene. Duvall pulls a gun on him, and he says the words that we both gasped at. What, are you going to shoot your own brother?
Yeah.
Say what? So we find out that Jimmy, his end game is, obviously he's not going to tell Duvall who exactly he is, at least not yet. But he's going to, play the family card to an extent. So he tells him that he's his half-brother. And that's within the realm of possibility because we found out last week that Jimmy was a bit of a womanizer in his past life. So it could have been the waitress from Coco's, as Duvall says, could have been anyone. But he's got a million questions. But, it's enough to sort of soften up Duvall and realize that they need to team up to take down Stax and Hume. And we get this almost, this little moment where Helen says, he's got a little bit of a cowboy vibe. And then Gracie
says, no, he's the sheriff.
He's a little bit more of a sheriff vibe.
Yeah.
Hits it right on the nose.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm wondering is that this story posits that Duval has had a half brother this whole time. Do we think that might make him resent Jimmy even more?
Sort of. I think especially when he sees how similar he is to his father, or he thinks it's his half-brother is similar to his father, he's like, oh, did they have a closer relationship than I did? And so there's definitely some resentment there.
Sure. And the fact
Jealousy
fact that he never even knew about this brother until just this moment.
Yeah.
I think that's just throwing gasoline on the fire. That is their contentious relationship. We come back, we find out that the cops think that Jimmy is the one that not only killed Luther and took his guns, but also beat up those cops on that bridge. So, they're looking for him in full force. Duval he's not only confused by the presence of this half-brother, but he seems to be a little bit miffed that Jimmy gave him his name even. He says he's James or something.
He could have thought of something else to say besides James, but
right, exactly.
I think it just came to his mind first.
I'm Jimmy Jr. It's no big deal. Don't worry too much about it.
Yeah.
And they share this memory from their childhood of Jimmy taking Duval to Peng's as a kid to do his homework.
That was the moment I thought he could definitely be jealous of who he thinks is his half-brother and his relationship with the father. Right,
because we're getting all these revelations that we know, through Jimmy being his father, but he just thinks that, he had a favorite son.
Right, son that he was off visiting.
Right. We find out that Jimmy used to go to Peng's constantly because Peng was the one that ran Chinatown. So they kind of had an agreement that would keep the streets safe. Once again, an example of Jimmy kind of working outside the confines of the law, but they had this agreement, and Jimmy, all he cares about is just his city, the way he calls it, staying safe, which is, once again, another point of contention between him and Duval.
Yes.
Because Duval doesn't want anything to do with this seedy underbelly of Seattle. But we find out that Peng died 10 years ago, left the place to his daughter Emma, who is forever in debt to, whoever is the offspring of Jimmy, because Jimmy never gave up I think it was her grandfather. But as grateful as she is, she's not going to help them track down these killers because it would be bad for business. And she says, you know what? You're not Sheriff Pritchard, so that debt isn't to you. And it's just, it's these things that keep hitting it on the nose.
If only he could say, yes, I am.
Right. But we see Jimmy take Emma aside and he tells her something. Now, we see later that he tells Duval what he said is, look, my son's in the FBI. He's going to help, watch your back. Do we think that's really what he said?
I don't know. Either that or he could have brought up a memory saying
that's what I was wondering.
Like that he knew would get her to say yes.
Sure.
Some secret.
Exactly. Yeah. Because my first thought was like, hang on. If he tells her the truth of this situation, that's going to be a long conversation.
Yeah.
So, he kind of uses Duval as this bargaining chip, really showing his powers of negotiation throughout this episode. And then a little boy comes out, meets the two of them, gives him a paper. We find out that 3 passports were requested from this infamous forger. It's not only the 2 killers, but it's also a little girl. They need a passport for some little girl. So now there's even more stakes. There's even more on the line. Mm-hmm. Cut to this little girl. Her mom is frantically packing. Little girl doesn't want to go. They're worried that, their dad, who's clearly either Stax or Hume, will come after them. And speak of the devil, he busts right in and grabs the woman from behind. Meanwhile, they... the cops are running restraining orders. Duval's running restraining orders. He's not finding any relationships for either of the men to try and find out, what sort of connection this little girl has.
Seemed like it was just like a lover or girlfriend, not an official.
Right. But then Jimmy, having 75 years of experience under his belt, realizes, check restraining orders. And we find out, boom, that's the key. Stax has 4 restraining orders by the same woman. They use that to find the address. But Duval, he decides that he's going to take matters into his own hands, cuffs Jimmy to the van, and says, you know what, you're going to stay in this alley till I figured things out. And then we cut back to, Stax and Hume. They're holding the woman and the little girl hostage. Hume, we find out, is called the Minister, which is interesting, which we'll find out once again more of the presence of God in this show. And we find out that Stax's plan is to marry this woman. He broke out with this minister so that he can marry them. Finds a Bible. He's going to marry her, much to her chagrin. And then we find out that after the deed is done, after they've been married, because he wants his little girl to take his name. After they got away from him, the little girl Lisa, she took her mom's name, and so he wants to remarry Beth and have her take his name.
It seems like he really does love the woman in a weird, sick way.
In a very, very twisted way.
He wants the daughter. He just, he's clearly a criminal that doesn't have it all together.
Right. But... So after that's done, the SWAT team arrives with Duvall. They find Beth all tied up. Stax took Lisa, and we find out once again conveniently, Looking Glass gave a tablet to every student in the city.
This was the moment that made me laugh.
we can just track Lisa that way. Meanwhile, the cops arrive at Peng's looking for Jimmy, but Emma has right away helped him out. He tries to test his powers by running through 3 feet of bricks. We find out finally that there's some limits to his powers. He's not just a complete mutant X-Man. But he goes through the alternate door in the freezer. Cops find the broken handcuffs, but no sign of Jimmy. Duvall took his phone, but of course it's wiped clean. Also, I'm not sure what would be on his phone anyway. Like, I don't know if Jimmy's taking selfies all around town.
I think they meant the tracking on his phone. Like, it looked like it was the text, but I think they said that they wouldn't be able to track him.
I see, because I thought when Duvall had handcuffed him, he also stole his phone to try and sort of track it. But you might be right.
I don't know.
So the cops are tailing Mary. We find out Jimmy, without his phone, that's why, without his phone, he has no timer, so he doesn't know when his body's going to start shutting down.
Right.
But Mary... She says she has to go after Jimmy, and Otto knows better. He says, no, you want to go after him.
Yeah.
And, we find out Otto was watching their conversation again, which I feel like is going to be... It's going to be a recurring theme as Otto just kind of hanging out and watching. But through that tablet, they find the address. They find the building where Stax and Hume have taken Lisa. Jimmy barges in or actually, no, Jimmy hasn't found the building just yet. Hume smashes the tablet. We have no idea. We have no idea how to track Lisa at this point. There's no convenient device for them to find her through. But eventually, Jimmy tracks down the address. He finds this building, and he pulls, guys, if you've played Arkham Asylum or Arkham Knight, Jimmy straight up pulls a Batman because he starts scratching on the wall to distract the minister, to distract Hume, and then punches right through it, knocks him right the hell out, and takes his gun, which I thought was awesome.
That was pretty cool.
More of the sheriff in action. Those walls were awfully thin, though.
They were.
How did
also, you wouldn't be able to hear a scratch, right? If it was thicker.
Right. So yeah, who knows? A lot of fishy stuff happening, but it's hilarious and it's a good time. Let's see. There's so much. Jimmy finally faces off with Stax. It's kind of the pivotal moment, and he touches on these themes that apply to the whole show. Stax says, when I escaped, I got myself reborn. And he asked Jimmy, you think that's possible?
He says, yes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that idea of, is it possible? Is it really possible to kind of be reborn? If Jimmy was this, dirty cop that didn't care about his family, can he be reborn?
Physically, I don't know about mentally.
Right, definitely. I mean, it's always going to be the same Jimmy in his head,
right.
And so it's that idea of if rebirth can actually happen is a fascinating idea. But once again, Looking Glass comes to the rescue. Otto hits a button at just the right moment, right as Stax pulls a gun on Jimmy. A mechanical arm swings by, distracts him, and in mid-sentence, in mid mid-monologue, rather, Jimmy just punches him right in the mouth, says, "You talk too much." Just like, once again, more of the sheriff, kicking ass, taking names, quite literally.
Yes.
I mean, Looking Glass is making things so convenient for him. We've got to see eventually it's got to either be shut down or be taken over, be infiltrated, something, you know?
That's a good point. It's getting a little too easy for them.
Right.
But it does make sense because Mary didn't even have a gun when she's going into this building. So they need that protection. Otherwise, it's just Jimmy who has the skills.
Exactly, yeah. So Jimmy takes out Stacks. We find out once Hume wakes up from his wall knocking out, he wakes up with a knife and Duvall's right there with a gun in his face. And we see Duvall and Jimmy teaming up, guys. That, Tenacious D fans, that's effing teamwork. What do we think of Duvall and Jimmy as a team? As a tag team?
I think it would be a good team if they could figure things out personality-wise because they have the skills that would make it a great team. Father-son team. They don't know it, though. Yeah,
definitely. So finally, we wrap things up with, we see a conversation between Mary and Jimmy, and she says he doesn't seem like a Jimmy. She wants to call him James. Do we think she's trying to kind of reshape him in the image that she wants?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of that line, but maybe that does make sense. Like trying to make him a little bit better.
Right.
That was right after the conversation when he said that he wasn't sure if he was the right kind of man for this experiment. Right.
He said, he asked her, "Are you worried about who you brought back?"
Right.
And I'm thinking, I don't think so, because I think there's literally no chance that Jimmy won't do the right thing. So I don't think Mary has anything to worry about. I think if she's worried about anything, it's that Jimmy's going to go too far in trying to save a crime. He's going to die, and if he dies, Mary dies. They're intrinsically linked.
True. But maybe they can save his blood or something just as a backup.
I was going to say, why aren't they just stockpiling his blood? Why aren't they just why isn't there just a whole freezer? Just like that old Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, guys? You know what I'm talking about. Huge walk-in freezer full of blood. Did you watch Are You Afraid of the Dark?
No.
Sorry.
Yes.
Worst.
We'll pretend.
The worst. So after we get that conversation between Mary and Jimmy, we see Jimmy and Duvall interact at Peng's, and we get what's basically going to be the engine for the series going forward. Jimmy says in so many words, there's a city just full of crimes that's waiting to be solved. We could team up. We could do this. Brothers.
I think he wants to help people, so Jimmy likes this idea, but also I think he'd love to spend more time with his son too, especially after dying and realizing that could all be lost.
Right. And that was another thing that I had right here that I completely forgot about. After Stax and Hume are taken care of, Jimmy has this moment where he picks up Lisa, and it almost seems like he's hesitant to it, but then he sort of embraces it. I mean, do we feel like this new Jimmy is realizing how important family is and how much he took that for granted before?
Possibly, but I feel like he did have a really strong relationship with Gracie. As you can see,
that is true.
Absolutely adores him.
That's very true.
So maybe he always loved the granddaughter, just never really had the connection with his son.
Interesting. Okay, that's a very good point. Very good point. But Jimmy wants to team up. Duvall still a little bit skeptical. They agree to think about it, but before Duvall leaves, he conveniently takes Jimmy's glass, very carefully with his fingerprints on it. What do we think he's gonna find when he runs those prints?
Nothing, because there's no trace to.
Right. Do we think Looking Glass is powerful enough to just wipe those prints completely?
Maybe, but I think wouldn't there be no fingerprints to link it to, because has a new body, so it's not the same as the original Jimmy's fingerprints.
Oh, true. So maybe
it'll be someone just not in their system.
But maybe he doesn't even have prints altogether. How fishy is that? How suspicious is that? If he just doesn't, if they're just smooth, he just can't grip things.
He probably has prints, but new prints that have never been seen before.
Sure. And then he sees the namesake of this episode. I should have said this up top. Name of this episode is One More Notch, because every time Jimmy put away someone new, Peng would cut one more notch into his bar. And sure enough, Duvall, right before we cut to black, he sees one freshly cut notch.
That was awesome.
Behind that bar.
I'm sure he knows that it was Jimmy, or who he thinks is half brother.
Right.
But I think he thinks he was doing it in his dad's name rather than his actual dad, but it was still super cool.
And that was another thing. Yeah, that was something that I glossed over, is that obviously Duval has no idea that Jimmy was even there at the scene with Stax and Hume. Jimmy's just telling him information that he's conveniently reading from the paper.
Right.
And not only that, we find out that Looking Glass is powerful enough to doctor that body cam footage from the cops and swap Stax out with Jimmy.
Like a Photoshop. But...
They got some Photoshop skills. But so Duval takes the class with the prince, sees one more notch. That wraps up episode 2. So let's get into some predictions.
And now, your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
Oh, I love that. That's never gonna get old to me. So what do we think? We touched on some of the predictions that we've got. What do we think? What do we think is going to happen with Looking Glass? Let's narrow it down to that. Do we think someone's going to maybe hack into it?
Possibly. I think something will have to happen just to make the story more interesting.
Right.
Because it's getting too easy, unless they just keep on going with the theme the whole season, which is also possible.
Right. Do we think Looking Glass is even susceptible to hacking?
It'd probably be very hard.
It'd be hard, but there's some geniuses out there.
But why? Like, why would anyone hack it?
Because it's so powerful. I think someone might find out on the sly just how omnipotent and how powerful Looking Glass is. So they want that power in their hands. But as we said last week, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's how the world goes crazy, goes to hell. But here's my out there prediction, because I feel like the prediction segment is where we got to get the wacky. We got to get the wacky ones out. Do we think Otto is going to become the villain? Like the main villain.
I didn't think about him becoming the main villain.
I'm talking like Black Hat, number 1 bad guy villain. He wants to re-kill Jimmy.
Maybe if he gets so jealous, because I think Mary's going to continue to have this crush on Jimmy, and they're going to get closer, and he's going to get so jealous. But if you think about it, if Otto went against Jimmy, who's going to win? Jimmy.
Sure, but I don't know. See, Otto versus Jimmy. Oh my God, I just realized it. Otto versus Jimmy is Superman versus Batman.
It would be Looking Glass versus Jimmy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. See, Batman, he was a human, he was immortal, but he had Wayne tech. He had all the gadgets, he had the brilliance. That's what Otto has. Whereas Jimmy, he may not have the gadgets, but he's got the super strength. It's Batman versus Superman, guys. Otto versus Jimmy, Dawn of Justice. It's happening.
That does sound like a good twist.
Man. Otto, and what if, do we think that Mary might be cured by the end of the season?
I think so.
Yeah?
Either...
Because if that happens, Otto, I mean, if he doesn't have that purpose of saving his sister's life, then what?
Well,
then
maybe
what does he do?
She won't be completely cured, but she'll be improving. So I think it'll be a continuous improvement for her.
Sure. Well, guys, tweet us. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Let us know what you think about Otto versus Jimmy as Batman versus Superman. I'm calling it right now. Jamie, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at JamieBanks_, and I'd love to hear your opinion, so you should definitely tweet me.
Absolutely, and as always, you can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, at Ty Matthews, PMA. You can find me all over the AfterBuzz Network, Monday Night Raw Mondays, Pitch Slap Tuesdays, Second Chance Wednesdays, The Magician starring this coming Thursday. I'm all over this place, guys. But remember, download, rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff. Come back. We're right here next week, 11 p.m. But until then, take a chance. Later.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.